Hi, this is Steve Worona, and you're listening to Campus Public Safety Online from the National Center for Campus Public Safety. Before I introduce today's speakers, here's a brief orientation to the Adobe Connect interface we're using. Your browser right now is showing the title slide for today's talk. On the left side of your screen, you'll see a box labeled Questions and Comments where you can read and type messages. There's a tab labeled Everyone at the bottom of this box, and that's the tab you'll use for all of your general messages, including questions and comments for our speakers. We'll be breaking for questions several times during the presentation, so please do not hold your questions to the end. You can also send direct messages to a specific person by hovering your cursor over a name in the attendee list. And one of those names is Technical Help, and that's the place to go if you run into technical problems. We're also monitoring Twitter for your questions and comments. Use hashtag NCCPSWebinar. That's NCCPSWebinar. If you missed part of today's conversation, or if you want to see some or all of it again, this webinar is being recorded. The link will be available shortly after the webinar on the NCCPS Webinars page. And watch your email for a link to a brief evaluation survey requesting your questions and comments on today's presentation. Please take a minute to respond to that survey when the link arrives. We do appreciate your feedback. And now for today's presentation. The National Center for Campus Public Safety is highlighting Sexual Assault Awareness Month with two special webinars. Today we're spotlighting the You Have Options program. YHOP aims to make law enforcement's response to sexual assault more effective by changing two fundamental elements in that response. First, by increasing the number of victims who report to law enforcement, and second, by thoroughly investigating identified offenders for serial perpetration. We'll be learning about the program from Carrie Hull, director of the program, and Christia Currie, YHOP Training and Information Specialist. In addition to her position as YHOP director, Carrie Hull is an instructor with the Oregon Sexual Assault Training Institute, serves as a member of the Legislative and Public Policy Committee for the Oregon Sexual Assault Task Force, and is a member of the National Crime Victim Law Institute's Advisory Council. She also works with the National Center for Campus Public Safety as an instructor with our Trauma-Informed Sexual Assault Investigation Program. Christia Currie has worked in the field of advocacy since 2008, providing direct services to survivors of sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and stalking. Carrie and Christia, welcome to Campus Public Safety Online. Carrie, I believe you're going to kick things off.
Yes, thanks so much, and we are thrilled to be here and to be able to offer some information in more detail on the You Have Options program. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. We'll go ahead and just get started. So what is YHOP? What is the You Have Options program? It is a program that was developed directly from law enforcement professionals, and it really seeks to improve the criminal justice response to sexual assault. We believe that no matter how individuals feel about law enforcement, there really is truth in that to ultimately hold offenders accountable through the criminal justice system, you have to engage with law enforcement, and a lot of the solutions to this need to come from within the profession to be really applicable and to be sustainable. So we wanted to create something that was for law enforcement, taking into the considerations and the dynamics of our profession. And in order to do that correctly and appropriately, we really had to make sure that we weren't the only ones that were looking for these solutions. So we work very, very closely in partnership with advocacy and with additional experts in the field of sexual assault response and prevention. And, even more importantly than that, that we work very, very closely and continue to work closely with sexual assault survivors who inform the program and are really the reason that the foundation of the program and the elements that we're going to talk about today are what they are. Christia will be talking in more detail about the 20 elements of the program. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with a brief overview to provide some foundational material. The goals of the You Have Option program, we believe, are pretty straightforward and also very necessary. So our first goal, in order to achieve some success within the criminal justice system in holding offenders accountable, we have to start by increasing reporting to law enforcement. And in order to increase that reporting, we really seek to eliminate as many barriers as possible, completely acknowledging we are not going to be able to eliminate all of the barriers, but we do know that law enforcement can be an active participant in eliminating quite a few of them. what we are going to
And
do
Carrie,
once
let me stop you there for a minute. We are getting some comments that you're difficult to hear. Anything you can do to speak up or move your mouthpiece closer would be appreciated.
Sure, I will definitely try to do that.
Thanks.
Is that a little better?
Sounds a little better in my ear.
Okay, I apologize for that. I don't think I can get it any closer to my mouth and still be able to speak.
Thanks.
Okay, so once we do get the sexual assault reporting piece, we want to be really responsible with the information that survivors are stepping forward and sharing with us. So the sort of second half of the program, if you will, is that we're going to do right by that information and that process, and we're going to really spend some time identifying and hopefully using that information to allow prosecutors to actually move forward with the prosecution of sexual offenders. And then our sort of lofty long-term goal there is that we ultimately would love to see a decrease in sexual assault victimization. Those who work within the field understand that if we don't actually hold offenders accountable, it is going to allow them to just continue and reoffend, and we would like to interrupt that process. So the way we do this is really focusing on a uniform response. When legally permissible, and that's incredibly important, each agency that fully participates within YHOP offers the same protocols, and those are those 20 elements that Christia will speak about in a moment. Important about this is that this provides consistency for survivors stepping forward. It also provides accuracy in that, the experts and the advocates that we're working with and the victims who are informing this program are making sure that the way we're stepping forward and offering options is actually appropriate. And then very important for me in leading this program is accountability. We do not want to be a part of a program that steps forward and says, hey, we're going to do this, come speak with us, this is a place that you have options, and then have any of the law enforcement agencies that are participating not follow through with that promise, because that can be extremely re-victimizing to people stepping forward, and we definitely seek to not have that happen. So this program is a national program, and it is law enforcement agencies working together across jurisdictions. We believe this is incredibly important as well because our offenders don't stick within jurisdictions, and we're all on the same side of this in law enforcement, so we really seek to be collaborative in this. We currently have 3 states that have agencies that are fully implemented, and those states are Oregon, Colorado, and Washington. Oregon has the founding agency, which is the Ashland Police Department, where I'm currently a detective at. Colorado has the first national law enforcement agency, and that agency is the Brighton Police Department. And then Washington has the second national law enforcement agency, and that is the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. So we're very proud to have them. We currently have additional agencies that are in implementation phase, and that means that they are not fully completed with their training as of yet, so they're not listed on the national website. But we have agencies within Virginia, Missouri, Oregon, and New Hampshire in that phase. And additionally, we have agencies in pre-implementation phase, which means they have not attended the YHOP introductory session, which allows them to enter into implementation. And those states include Colorado, Louisiana, New York, Washington, Oregon, Arizona, and Nevada. So we're really proud of law enforcement that's stepping up and doing this. It's pretty exciting. Talked about the national website. Here is just one sort of piece of that website. You can find it at reportingoptions.org. And what this really allows is, some of that consistency that I already mentioned, and it also allows for law enforcement not to have to, reinvent the wheel or come up with this website on their own. They can join and they get their own unique page that follows the program protocols and elements, but it directly links the survivors who would be reporting to their agency with information about the You Have Options program response, and then their individual resources that are available to them. Particularly important for this is that one of the biggest barriers that we did identify is people just not being sure in what way it's right initially for them to report. So we wanted to give them an option to report online to start that process. This is one view of a piece of the online reporting form. These online reporting forms are consistent against and through all the agencies that participate. And you can see here that it does offer some different options. So you can choose to have an advocate contact you first before law enforcement responds. You can speak with law enforcement directly. You can choose to not have law enforcement contact you at all. You can also choose in which way you're contacted. So there's a reason it's called You Have Options, and we try and make sure that there are as many options as we can legally offer throughout this reporting process and then onwards into the investigation. Additionally, there's no required information in this online report form. You can leave your name, you can not leave your name. There is not any place that is required except to check one of those boxes up above that does let us know if you'd like to have any further action taken. Those online reports direct report to the agency that is participating, so we don't house any of that information at our headquarters. They do it was encrypted all the way directly to the agency. So there's no requirement, again, that they talk with us directly at headquarters. We are encouraging people to work directly with the agency that is participating. So very quickly, we did want to just briefly talk about how you would go about joining the program if it looked like this might be right for your jurisdiction. You do have to be a sworn law enforcement agency, so and you do have to be within the United States as well. You attend the YHOP introductory session, and that is a train-the-trainer model. So you can send, we do require at least one personnel from within the law enforcement agency, and they need to be what we call the YHOP trainer. And they will be responsible for then training the other personnel within that law enforcement agency. In addition, somebody is identified as the administrator for that specific jurisdiction, and they are the ones that really coordinates directly for technical assistance with us sort of at the headquarters for it. After you go to introductory session, you sort of start through this process that is customized to your agency because each individual agency is going to have their own barriers to implementing this. And there's pretty much 7 phases of that where you're taking 3 of the elements at a time and implementing them in your agency. And then at the end of that, those 7 phases, you will have had time to implement the 20 elements along with some climate surveys of your department, your community, and some accountability with some community check-ins. We rely very heavily on community-based advocacy to let us know how our law enforcement agencies are doing. The agencies also include all of the elements into policy, so it is sustainable and there is accountability for the people stepping forward and that this is a policy and it's a shall, not a should. They also additionally sign an MOU and a Memorandum of Understanding with YHOP. And after all of that is completed, they are listed on the national website. And that, again, really assists with that accountability piece where people can directly talk with us if agencies are not actually offering the elements. So a little bit, just quickly, I'd like to talk about why this is even necessary. And what we found when we were creating the program was that we, as the Ashland Police Department, were really relying on some assumptions regarding victims. Mainly that victims wanted law enforcement to be involved, that victims who were coming forward, we were assuming that they want the suspect caught and prosecuted. If we received false information, we were equating that with a false report when we all know that's not true. And that this uniform approach that we were using in other caseloads was also going to be effective in a sexual assault caseload. So what we were left with when that happened is this sort of response to victims from the traditional way of doing things that was, we're going to go forward in the manner that works best for us. And frankly, that's just not an effective way to investigate or respond to sexual assault through the criminal justice program. What it leaves us with when we do that is we increase the barriers, and that really keeps people from seeking assistance through the criminal justice system. And when that happens, we don't get the information that we need to actually be able to hold our offenders accountable. And those offenders then often go on to victimize additional persons. Now, I don't talk with any law enforcement that is okay with any of that happening. So we really sought to interrupt that. How can we interrupt that traditional response? And we wanted to really make sure that we weren't participating in increasing these things from happening. We were seeing in our traditional early response before we changed, victims leaving a lot of information out. and victims not continuing with the investigation or providing false information. And I want to make sure and note here that false information definitely does not equate a false report. And so, we wanted to provide some environment that encouraged survivors to come forward in the way that was right for them and helped us positively impact what was happening with this traditional response. And we really wanted to decrease the number of victims that were stepping forward initially, and then because of that criminal justice process, and again with other factors as well, but seeing that they didn't want to go forward. And traditionally, oftentimes they're left with no other option other than saying that the assault did not happen in order for that investigation to stop. So we really want and sought to lower the amount of recantations that law enforcement was receiving. And this is what we came up with. It's a very simple solution. There is nothing complicated about this program or solution, and it is really good responses that a lot of law enforcement agencies have been doing for a very long time, just brought together and formalized within the program. And what it is that we've created a program that's beneficial for both law enforcement and the victim, instead of just one or the other. And what we want people to sort of understand, the philosophy, the base behind this model is, traditionally we hear law enforcement or we hear certain people saying, well, why didn't the person come forward and tell us everything? They should have come forward and told us what happened. That way we could have prevented further victimization. Other people wouldn't have gotten hurt. We really believe that that's an ineffective way to come at this caseload, and we are encouraging law enforcement and encouraging our profession to just be grateful that someone steps forward and provides us with any intelligence at all on offenders, and to be very grateful that that happens, even if that is only an information report that we are unable to take any further action on. It's still more information than we had before. And Steve, I'm going to go ahead and probably throw that back to you and break for some questions if there's any.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. You are listening to Campus Public Safety Online from the National Center for Campus Public Safety, and today we're talking about the You Have Options program with Carrie Hull and Christia Currie. If you have comments or questions for Carrie or Christia, type them into that blank line on the left side of your screen in the questions and comments pod, and we will present those questions during the course of this hour. We do understand that some people are having some trouble hearing. I hope that those of you who are having trouble hearing have been able to dial into that toll-free phone number that's sitting there on the bottom of your screen, so that we'll be able to have you hear the entire presentation. Carrie, how long does it take for a law enforcement agency to implement the program?
Oh, great question. So it is very unique to the individual agency, and that's an additional thing that I think we're proud of with this program, that we don't believe that everybody should be forced to fit into a specific timeline, because when we see programs that do that, it sort of decreases the success and the sustainability of what you're trying to implement. So we have agencies that are very small, maybe some that have less than 10, road deputies that are working, and they're going to, for the most part, be able to implement this training a little quicker because they don't have as many people to train. We also are working with agencies that have thousands of officers, and they have implementation plans that are upwards of 3 years. We're proud of that, though, because it's sustainable and it's real change. We're requiring within the program actual policy change. So it's not just something that you put a flyer out about and you do a news story about and try and say, oh, we're doing this wonderful thing, and then there isn't actually any cultural change within the police agency and the community as well. We're really looking and seeking for this to be long-term. So it depends on every agency. For sort of an average that we see, and we are still a new program, so a little bit of this is just anecdotal, we see most agencies take a minimum around 12 months. And that's because they're taking their time to work through those elements, identify the barriers in their community for them, identify confidentiality concerns, have some success with cases, and then they definitely utilize some of our technical assistance as well. And that can take some time, and we encourage them to take that time.
And Carrie, someone notes they lost audio on the part about becoming an instructor trainer. Can you repeat that?
Sure. So when you attend introductory session, as long as you are employed by the sworn law enforcement agency that is looking to implement, you can become a trainer. So your law enforcement agency is going to identify who they would like to be their trainers and who they would like to be their administrators. Some of our very small agencies, they are able to do both, but that's a lot of work for one person typically when they're implementing this. So most agencies send a minimum of 2, and they don't need to know that before they come to introductory session. They oftentimes we will work with them after they attend to see what's right for their department. We just don't start any of the technical assistance with trainers or administrators until they've attended the introductory session.
And I'm going to merge a couple of questions and get one more question in during this break. Keep those questions coming. We won't lose any of them. We'll get to them in the next break. Someone asked, do you have many campus police agencies involved currently? And I suspect at the same time somebody typed, do you have any universities in your program?
Sure. So you do have to have sworn law enforcement. That is the requirement. So universities that have campus non-sworn, law enforcement or public safety officers, they would not actually be able to participate in the national program, though we do still encourage them to implement the elements as they're available to them, because there are definitely elements that would still be helpful. However, the program is just for people who actually respond to and investigate sexual assault. So if you would turn with your university those assaults over to the municipality near your university, then it would be the municipality that would participate. We do have universities in both pre-implementation and implementation phase. We do not talk about the name of the university unless they give us permission to do so, and so one of the ones that I am allowed to talk about is Virginia Commonwealth University, which we're very proud of and have an amazing chief and team there that has just been doing some pretty phenomenal work regarding sexual violence. And so Chief Venuti did implement this program, and we believe they will be fully implemented easily within this year. So you'll see them on the national website. There's additionally more agencies, and the reason some of them choose not to publicly acknowledge their implementation is that there is some concern that if they chose for whatever reason to not continue in it, that it would be viewed very negatively, and so we want to respect that process for them. As those agencies do come online, we are in a redesign of our website. They will be listed on that national website, so I would just refer people there to be checking in, and as those agencies come online, they will see that information.
Thanks, Carrie, and why don't we let you get back to your presentation with the next slide.
All right, so just continuing on then to provide a little bit more information on the foundation of the program. When we really sought to do this, it was around 2009, 2010 in the city of Ashland in Oregon. And what I did is I started just speaking with sexual assault survivors, and we were very frustrated by the lack of success that we were having in our cases. And so we decided to just start opening that up for a dialogue. What can we change? What do you wish that law enforcement had done for you that we didn't do? What parts of the process frustrated you? And, what really kept you or keeps other people from coming forward? And this probably won't be a surprise to anybody on this webinar, but what we identified routinely and continue to identify as we move forward is these 3 barriers to reporting. Confidentiality has been expressed in every case that I have worked personally, and each survivor that I have spoken with, we have the opportunity to continue working directly with a lot of survivors across the nation. And routinely, we just hear confidentiality is one of the main barriers to coming forward. So this program does a lot to try and keep people confidential while also being very transparent and honest about the times that we cannot do that, which is why you'll see when Christia talks about the 20 elements, there are definitely 2 elements that can be impacted by federal laws or state-specific laws. Specifically for, I'm sure many people on this call, Title IX and Clery are going to have a couple impacts if you're a sworn law enforcement agency at a university to the confidentiality that a municipality, for instance, could offer. You can still participate with the program and be hugely successful with it, but you're going to need to be more upfront with the people reporting to you that those elements are going to be impacted by those specific laws. We also routinely heard just this fear of not being believed. So providing a way to move forward with the information you wanted law enforcement to have without there being a requirement to continue on in the process, we feel has really impacted this positively. There is an option to just provide information and not participate in any investigation. And we do see that survivors sort of test the system with that. And so if they are concerned about not being believed, we hope that their first contact with law enforcement is a positive one. We believe our agencies spend a lot of time making sure that that is the case, and it assists with this fear of not being believed. And then we really understood the frustration that many victims and survivors felt that if they didn't initially make the decision to report something acutely, they felt that their response by law enforcement was that, well, because you didn't report this right away, there's very little we can do for you. And so we saw that was a pretty significant barrier to getting information to law enforcement, and we just, of course, don't agree with that. You can definitely move forward with cases that have significant delays in reporting, and we'll talk a little bit about one of the elements that actually encourages people to report even if their case is past the statute of limitations, because they still have very important information for law enforcement to have. So what this really has left us with is this pretty great collaboration that we've been able to foster since about 2010 when we moved forward with this program in a more formal way, and then 2013 when we went live with the first national website. And what we've seen happen is that law enforcement gets information they otherwise would not have had access to. And what the victims coming forward are telling us is they're getting that feeling of belief, they're getting the anonymity that they've requested, whatever level they've requested, and most importantly, they feel like they have some control over the process. And I think that's incredibly important for anybody who can think what that might look like if they chose to report. Control is a very important and understandable part of that. So we believe in a victim-centered response, and I know that that term is thrown around quite a bit, so I'll just define that out a little bit for what that means for YHOP law enforcement agencies, that all of them believe in providing sexual assault victims with as much control as they legally can, as much control as the law allows. And that really assists us with gathering much more accurate information about who the offenders are in our communities, and it gives us access to information we're unlikely to have received otherwise. And what we also see is that people stepping forward are more likely to actually identify the person that hurt them. Even if we can't move forward on a case, over time that information, when you're trying to identify potential serial offenders in your community, becomes very, very valuable. It has always been valuable. We just want to be more upfront with our survivors and make sure that they know law enforcement is interested and will take that information very, very seriously when they give it to us. We have found as well that our survivors stepping forward to our agencies participate more completely with the entire judicial process. I do want to make sure it's very clear this is a program only for law enforcement. It is not a program that directly impacts prosecutor or offices of prosecution. So we have had requests from offices of prosecution to join the program, but this is only for law enforcement, and there's a couple reasons for that. We want to be honest with victims stepping forward about the parts that they can control. So within the program, if they decide that they would like to move forward and they're ready and we have probable cause and we make an arrest and we refer the case at that time to this other profession, this office of prosecution, the same elements are not going to be offered potentially at that office. And there's reasons for that within the judicial system. So we wanted to have a very clear line there that we are not telling prosecutors what to do in their job. All we're seeking to do is do a much better, more thorough, more accurate investigation so that they have better information to move forward with themselves. And really for us, we've been very happy to say over time we have seen consistency that victims are just saying the entire experience with law enforcement is more positive, even if they're seeing a district attorney not file on a case or potentially not the outcome that we all would have hoped for with a case that goes to trial. We aren't seeing them saying they regret coming in the first place, and we are able to offer a way for them to help out in other cases in a way that's right for them without that burden being their responsibility. What is nice about this, and I think what really, really does help us, is we marry this sort of increased reporting with that victim-centered response that I was talking about, and it has really assisted in identifying sexual offenders. Our goal in law enforcement is to affect community safety, and this is a really wonderful way that we can do that in a way that's right for the individual survivor. So how we measure success within the program is a pretty significant break from the traditional criminal justice system. We believe that if we see an increase in reporting, an increase in trust from those that are reporting to us, that we identify more offenders, and see an increase in empathy from the law enforcement response, hopefully leading to increased victim satisfaction overall with law enforcement, we consider that success. We do not measure success based on the number of arrests, prosecutions, or convictions. Obviously, we want that information, but we believe if we can shift our focus to these types of measures of success, ultimately the entire process will be more successful. And I think, Steve, I'm open for questions if there is any.
Okay, yes, we have some left over from last time and some new ones that came in. A number of people were wondering about the interaction between YHOP and Clery and Title IX. What can you say about that?
Sure. So it depends on the university's response. I think we're all pretty aware the administrative process can look very different from university to university. The campus environment can be a cause of that. But it interacts very well, we believe, because again, these elements were created on a national platform so that they are as the law allows. You just need to be very transparent with your community, with your, whether that's a campus community, whether that's a municipal community, about what options are affected by things such as Title IX and Clery. We will talk in a minute about the 20 elements, and after that point I will be happy to talk specifically about the elements where we see the biggest impact and the biggest difference if it is a campus. And when you're listening to those elements, be kind of looking at element 17 that can be impacted by Title IX and element 15. So if that's a question for you, I would be looking specifically at 15 and 17 when Christia talks about it.
Let me squeeze one more question in there before we get to those 20 elements. What information is the YHOP database collecting?
So the database, we're very proud of this because it is a pretty big departure. Traditionally, law enforcement agencies, we have uniform crime reporting, UCR information, and it's not a lot of information specific to the nature of how sexual assaults perpetration occurs. So our database really goes quite a bit further. We identify the barriers that the victim felt, and so we're keeping information about all those barriers. We're also asking for and gathering information about what assisted with the victim's decision to report. We also are looking at anything that applies to that victim at the time of reporting, just to seek long-term if there's anything that we can do to address barriers. We also are looking at a lot of information about the suspect, so it's really important for our program to shift the focus away from the victim and more onto the offender where it belongs. And so we are gathering information about different things that related to the suspect at the time of the incident, at the time of the report, different power differential dynamics that we're gathering about that. Was there evidence collected? Was a pretext phone call done? Was there an admission or confession in this investigation? So it's a much more in-depth look individually at these cases, and then over time we'll have that information available. And we do hope that somebody will be able to do some sort of research study on that. We have very good partnerships with a lot of national organizations that are very interested over time as more agencies participate to use this information, hopefully to inform all of our practices a little bit more accurately.
Before you move on, let me squeeze in this one, which seems relevant to what you just said. Am I correct that once an agency becomes a part of this program, that they receive their own site, but all the information is connected so that if there's a suspect named, it will show up from agency to agency?
Yes, and actually that is, so there's just some standard law enforcement sort of protocol things that happen for us to move across jurisdictions regarding to offender information, which is why it's really important that it's law enforcement that is leading the way in this, because there's things that only we have access to. So specifically regarding offenders and stuff, the information is sanitized within the database, anything that comes to sort of our headquarters. We don't have any specific names or anything attached to that because all of that, again, is something that could be subpoenaed, and we're trying to maintain the requested confidentiality level for these individual victims. However, individually at the agencies, they would have that information, and if you're law enforcement, we give them tools within that introductory session to be able to access that information and work across state lines for that.
Okay, thanks. And now we'll let you get back to your 20 elements.
Great. So this is Christia, and I'm the Training and Information Specialist for the U of Options program. And I will be briefly going over all of our 20 elements. And these are really the core of our program. Echoing what Carrie had said earlier, this is just the uniform response that we require of the agencies that are participating in YHOP. So we'll get started with element number 1, which is essentially the 3 options for reporting. Again, it was mentioned earlier that there's an online report, so somebody can do an information-only report, and it is exactly what it sounds like, just giving information to law enforcement. There's also partial investigation, which looks like taking a few steps in an investigative process, or there's a complete investigation, and that allows for an arrest or the case to go to an office of prosecution. So that's the first element of the program. And moving into the second element here, any information that we receive from anyone, we like to include and document. So this includes third-party information. It must be documented by participating You Have Options agencies. And that just echoes what Carrie has said about, maintaining the information that allows us to look at offenders in our communities. And here, element 3. So the next 2 elements, you're going to see some similarities in element 3 and 4. This one specifically is about questions. So making sure that somebody has the ability to ask a lot of questions before giving any information, specifically identifying information or incident information to law enforcement. This gives somebody the opportunity to have a lot of choice in what they want to do as far as an information-only report or a partial investigation. They can have a clear idea of what the benefits or consequences of that might be. And in element 4, having, again, the information necessary to make the choice that's best for them. So clear explanation. We've heard this from survivors. Like Carrie said, the foundation of the program was built on insight from survivors. And giving a lot of information about what's going to happen can be really, really helpful to survivors. So this is what this element was built on. So element 5, this element really addresses some of the primary barriers that Carrie had mentioned earlier, specifically around confidentiality. It's that online report or reporting through an advocate that allows a survivor to give just the information that they want to give. And again, that online report is really, really helpful in that specific process. Element 6. So we keep mentioning this control, giving control over. And for law enforcement agencies, this is a really easy way to be collaborative with a survivor. So giving control over around location, time, and date where their initial report is made, that can really begin a collaborative experience with a survivor and law enforcement agency. So that's why this is a core tenet of the program. So element 7, this is regarding information and time limitations. So specifically in our program, we encourage reporting even when something is outside the statute of limitations. So we want to get intelligence on offenders in our community. And if somebody wants to give us information about an offender that might still currently be in our community, even if there's nothing essentially that the judicial system can see that could be done about that, we still want the information. So we really allow for as much or as little as the person wants to give, but also not with any time restrictions. So I think a lot of you all know this as well, but we see advocacy as a best practice in the program. Our law enforcement agencies are connected with their local advocacy resources, their system-based advocacy resources. And through technical assistance, if they haven't had an established relationship, we can support them in creating that relationship again. And advocates are supported by research. It's helpful in the process for a survivor to have an advocate alongside them. So we really see this as a primary part of our program. Element 9. This echoes element 8, so oftentimes survivors like to have an advocate in the room or another support person. Again, this is something that we really heard from survivors when we were collecting information, that having somebody there for any part of the reporting process or the investigation can be really helpful and help them to stay engaged in the process. So they may be accompanied the entire time by a support person. And element 10, again, program was, we developed this with the insight from survivors. So this one might seem really common sense, right? That of course somebody can leave an interview without any permission and they don't have to provide a reason. But what we heard is because of the power dynamic that exists between law enforcement and citizens that they don't necessarily feel that way. So it is really, really important that our agencies are explicit about this. So they can say in the beginning of an interview, you can leave at any time, you don't have to give me a reason, and here's the way out. And it just kind of alleviates some of the power dynamics that exist there. Element 11. So this is about pressuring a victim during a criminal investigation. Really, we don't see this happen all the time, but one of the places that a really well-intentioned officer might do this is that they're encouraging a survivor to go forward in order to prevent an offender from offending on other people. So, if you go forward with this, then you're going to do this great thing and keep other people from being victimized. It's really important, and we talk about this a lot in intro session, that we don't put that onus or that responsibility on the survivor. So there's no pressure in any part of our process to participate in a criminal investigation. Carrie, again, talked about barriers earlier, and this really is something we talk about with law enforcement, again, during our introductory session. To meet the individual needs of the survivor specific to the interview in this element, and we spend time helping them understand how to address those barriers individually. And this element is our trauma-informed interviewing element. So we specifically use the forensic experiential trauma interview, the FETI technique, developed by Russell Strand. We facilitate FETI trainings nationally, and we also have a piece of FETI interviewing within our introductory session that gives law enforcement an opportunity to have some training before jumping in. So element 14 is again about addressing barriers, but specifically in the investigative process, and again, that's something we dive into in our introductory session with law enforcement. So this is an element where Title IX can kind of jump up, and we work directly with campuses and campus law enforcement to make language and outreach really explicit around how their confidentiality is impacted by Title IX. So it really is a lot of technical assistance we do, but certainly campuses have been able to work within the structure of Title IX and still provide a lot of options for survivors, including confidentiality. So Carrie mentioned ESA earlier in that diagram, and this is an investigative method that we talk a lot about in intro session. It's something that everybody has access to. It's just the way that we introduce it so that investigators can really investigate potential offenders in the community. Element 17, so investigators will collaborate with victims during the investigative process and respective victims' right to request certain investigative steps not be conducted. And they'll be conducted at a pace set by the victim. So really this is about pressing the pause button, saying, hey, I want to stop here, or I want to wait, I want to have this happen in a different timing, and really listening to what a survivor might need. That's the foundation of element 17. Element 18. So again, this is about pressing pause or disengaging. It allows, again, survivors to take this at their own pace, and it reiterates that there's no explanation that has to be given to law enforcement, that a victim or survivor can just choose to do that at any time. It gives them the control. So element 19, this is again just about collaboration with the victim. So not moving forward without the consent of the victim and understanding that justice is not the same for every person. We really talk a lot about that in intro session with agencies, that it looks different for every person. And finally, our last element. So we believe that what we're doing is a long-term strategy. Even if a case goes beyond the statute of limitations, we believe that it's worth investigating and it's worth taking time to do this. So even if it's outside of when prosecution can happen, we want to make sure that we are revaluing that information as well. So with all of that said, and I think what can be particularly important is that with legal mandates and some of the mandatory reporting laws, there are places where all of those 20 elements can't be fully provided. And obviously that's in cases with domestic violence, child abuse, or when somebody is still in physical danger. Again, people who are specifically campus law enforcement, they also have the implications of Title IX and Clery. And as Carrie mentioned earlier, and I mentioned in the elements, that's something that certainly can be navigated to still provide all of these options, some modifications, and a lot of information to survivors. So I think that we're going to move back to questions now and see what we have.
Thanks, Christia. Al Williams wonders, what is the YHOP policy or stance on the sexual assault kits? Are all kits forwarded to the lab, or does the victim decide?
So this is Carrie speaking as well, and thanks for that question. That's a good one. What YHOP does is it really puts the victim in the driver's seat of the investigation if we legally can. So this is going to be one of those state-specific requirements. We're going to be taking into consideration what the requirements are for your individual states, and then also looking at, okay, how can we navigate that within the elements of the program? So I will say, for instance, with our agency, the Ashland Police Department, we really, really want to identify serial offenders, never at the expense of the victim's wants or needs. So we have anonymous collection of kits here in Oregon. So that is an option if they weren't sure that they wanted us to have it yet, knowing that we do have policies coming forward within our state legislature that if a sexual assault kit is collected by law enforcement, it's a shall, not a should, that it's going to be tested, and we are big believers in that as well, again, while respecting that that is not every individual's choice. So we're going to let the victim drive that process if we have the legal opportunity to do so, and it doesn't mean that we can't always send it in. The sort of goal of this is let's work at the pace set by that survivor with the hope that over time we're going to be able to work together collaboratively to be able to do what's right to identify serial perpetration. We just want to be very cautious that we don't take away individual choice, and by doing that, we actually impact significantly all of the cases. So it might feel bad, it might feel uncomfortable in some of the situations where we're offering these options. We, of course, as law enforcement want to move forward in some of these cases where a survivor is saying, nope, I want to hit the pause button, but we're going to respect that individual choice because we understand that by doing so, ultimately, we're going to get much better, more accurate, more thorough investigations that are going to come from that. So that would probably be a technical assistance question you would work individually with us on if you started implementation.
Officer Worley wonders, have there been barriers with officers in implementing this? And let's extend it beyond officers. What types of barriers have you run into in general?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yes. And I will say I am somebody that loves it when people sort of disagree and give feedback on that. One, because it means that they're actually listening and paying attention, and then two, they're thinking about it, right? And of course, there's definitely barriers. This is a pretty big shift. It's a shift of control, and which is particularly interesting in this caseload because we know so much of it wraps around with control. But what I will say is that especially our agencies that are stepping forward and saying, yeah, this is really similar to the stuff that we're already offering. We love the accountability component. We want to participate and we want to be collaborative. Those agencies tend to have a culture within their agency where this innovation is already accepted. And on the individual officer level, of course, you're definitely going to have some people that can get frustrated because maybe these investigations take a little bit longer because the victim's hitting the pause button a couple times. What I will say over time, and I guess I'll pick on myself here a little bit, when I was implementing this at the Ashland Police Department, and this was before we had any intention of making this available to anybody else, there was pretty significant pushback from some individual officers. What has been nice to see over time, and yes, it took a lot of time, this was years, I've had several of those officers who were very against this in the beginning come to me and say, yeah, I mean, I still don't like it, but I see why it's necessary. And then additionally, what means a lot is they say if somebody that I loved or cared about was assaulted, I would want this process in place for them. So it takes time, and that's why we really want it to be sustainable change, and some of those barriers just need time to work through. It's additionally why some agencies are just going to take longer to implement than others, because there may just be a barrier within the culture that we need to spend some time offering assistance on addressing. And we don't want this to go away with turnover. We want this to be something that is so ingrained with that police department that if they get a new chief, if they the detective out of sex crimes rotates out, we don't have to start from the beginning again, because that ultimately is not good for anybody, particularly the survivors.
At one point during discussion of the elements, Christia mentioned FETI, and I'm not sure that everybody knows what that means, so can you say something about that?
Sure. So FETI is the Forensic Experiential Trauma Interview. One of our heroes, Russell Strand, created that out of the Army CID division. And we really just believe, unfortunately, there just is not training available for civilian law enforcement about how to interview a victim, at least not training that is specific to victims of crime that have experienced trauma. So we've had huge success with this technique. We're very cautious about listing best practices specific to individuals or agencies within the program, because they truly have to be victim-centered and they truly have to be vetted. We're very, very careful about that, and we've done very thorough vetting with that and believe wholeheartedly in what FETI offers to victims, and it additionally helps elicit a much better, accurate recall of the victim's experience, which has gone a long way to successful investigations and identification of offenders. So I would encourage anybody, regardless of how you feel about the You Have Options program, I would really encourage you to look at FETI. There is information on our website about that. You can get to it by going to the law enforcement portal from the homepage, and then if you click on training, the link to training at the top, there's actually a significant amount of information on FETI, including a white paper and some videos that you can look at. So very happy with our collaboration. Russell Strand is collaborating directly with us and assisting us in bringing that information to civilian law enforcement.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you done?
Oh, nope, yep.
Okay. Considering university involvement here, and with Clery being an issue in the investigative stage, are you aware of any issues with the length of time with having the victim hitting the stop button?
Definitely there can be things that you have to work through. It really is dependent on that administrative process. So where we do see, and this is very anecdotal, again, we have a small number of agencies right now. I'm sure that my answer to this will be different, the more agencies that come on. But what we found is that the agencies within a university that are looking to do this have a very progressive administrative response and a very well thought out response to sexual violence in general. So it's been maybe a little easier than we anticipated to navigate those sort of the 60-day time frame and things like that. What it really comes back to is transparency about the information prior to the report being made. So we just don't want to be misleading. We don't want to say, hey, come in and talk to us and you have all this control, if they really don't. We don't want to talk people out of reporting, but we want to be accurate about what their actual options are. And what we say for the program is we offer options, not advice. So it's not up to us, nor should it be up to any officer to give their individual opinion about what someone should do. We just want to create an environment where the options are there and the person can navigate that appropriately for their individual situation. So some of that information for a university law enforcement agency is going to be having a really clear understanding of what that administrative process is, and hopefully having really strong relationships with the people in that process to make sure that that information they're giving is accurate.
Can you say more about information-only reports?
Sure, yeah. So information-only reports are pretty much exactly what they sound like. They're the first step of the process if someone is unsure about how much they want to do or how little they want to participate. They can do that in a number of different ways, which we are very happy to have be part of the program. The online report we covered, there's a couple slides about that. There is also some other ways that I really saw survivors taking advantage of if they were just unsure, right? I mean, it sounds all good that we're going to do this, but very understandable that they are questioning if we're really going to offer the options we say we are. It's probably the biggest reason we have a website, because when I was working with survivors, they were saying, well, this is great, Carrie, but what about if I don't get you and I get another detective? How do I know that they have to do this too? And the way we were able to navigate that is essentially they wanted us to write it down, have somewhere that they could point, like, but you said you were going to do this, and here it is on this website. So that's part of the accountability. It's also part of our really thorough promise to people. And, regarding sort of how that looks when you really navigate it is going to be different for each jurisdiction, but collectively as a whole, all the agencies participating are going to be able to offer that the same. Information reporting individually, like in a campus environment, you maybe have some confidentiality impacts if somebody knows who you are and you walk in to report to the sworn law enforcement agency and you say, I just want to tell you what happened, but I don't want to tell you who I am. That is an option within our program, but it's only an option if they don't already know who you are. So you have to be thoughtful about that. And that's why working with advocates can be really helpful. We've seen significant success where a case started with an advocate stepping forward and saying, I have permission from this person I'm working with, from this client, to give you this information. They are not ready for you to know who they are, but they're okay with you initiating contact with them through me. And so it kind of gives this barrier, right, that is right for that victim. It gives them the confidentiality that they've requested. But what's great for law enforcement is it gives us someone to go to try and still engage with that survivor. And if that's the way they need to start the process, that is great. And at least we have some information rather than nothing. What we've seen over time is that it actually can happen pretty quickly where that survivor says, oh, okay, you did honor what you said you were going to do in there. This isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, or maybe I trust this system a little bit more. And we see them transition pretty quickly into meeting in person with law enforcement, disclosing who they are, and often actually moving forward with a case we hear that they never thought that they would have otherwise. So it's a bit of a lengthier process, but it's a much more effective process.
So a bit more on the contrast between campus law enforcement agencies and non-campus law enforcement agencies. What are the elements that a campus law enforcement agency might not be able to offer?
Sure. So 15 and 17 are, again, where I would direct people to be looking at. And that's mainly just because they're wrapped around confidentiality. Additionally, you might not be able to hit that pause button. And we use that language a lot in this program where we say the pause button. So additionally, element 19 might be affected, not so much on the law enforcement side. So law enforcement is not going to get a directive within that administrative process to move forward with an arrest, so they could still honor that. However, the campus process is still going to take that information, and because law enforcement is going to be a responsible person, they're going to be sharing that information with the administrative process. So there still definitely could be, like, say, a Title IX hearing that's forward, and there's some process that moves forward, even if the survivor said, no, I really wanted that to stop and I wasn't ready for that to go forward. We want to be very clear about the different roles. We don't want law enforcement to step into the role of the administrative process, and we don't want administrative process to step into the role of law enforcement. We sort of say we are in different lanes, but we're on the same highway, and we want to be very clear about that. So it comes back to information and making sure that the people reporting to you understand that that is a potential implication of moving forward with their report. We do find, as long as you're being upfront and really trying to give at least the information that you should have, you're not going to be able to cover every situation that comes up. We find survivors are very appreciative of that, and they understand the limitations that campuses have. They are fairly understanding about that.
Thanks very much, Carrie and Christia, and thanks to all of our viewers and questioners from around the Internet. Check the NCCPS webinars page for a link to the captioned recording of today's webinar, as well as a link to our speakers' slides. The brief evaluation survey on today's session that I mentioned earlier should already be in your mailbox. It will take you no more than 2 minutes to complete it. Please do. We read and act on your comments. The National Center for Campus Public Safety continues its recognition of Sexual Assault Awareness Month from 2 to 3 p.m. on April 19th with Sexual Assault, Courageous Conversations and Bystander Intervention, a webinar presented by Tom Tremblay. Throughout his distinguished 30-year policing career as an officer, Detective Supervisor, Police Chief, and State Public Safety Commissioner, Tom Tremblay has been a passionate leader for the prevention of domestic and sexual violence. He's now a national and international advisor and trainer for police, prosecutors, advocates, higher education, the military, and the private sector. The webinar is free, but registration is required. Click the link on your screen or visit the NCCPS webinars page. Campus Public Safety Online is brought to you by the National Center for Campus Public Safety with support from the University of Vermont Continuing and Distance Education and the U.S. Department of Justice. Special thanks today to Andrea Young. This is Steve Worona. See you next time on Campus Public Safety Online.